The morning mist hung thick over the Afghan mountains, like a gray blanket that refused to lift. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his eye against the scope of his rifle, scanning the rocky terrain below their position. The silence was broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the jagged peaks and the steady breathing of his four-man team positioned around him. "Movement at 11 o'clock," whispered Petty Officer Jake Rodriguez, his voice barely audible through the comm system. The SEALs had been watching this valley for 3 days, waiting for their high-value target to show himself. Intelligence reports indicated that a Taliban commander responsible for several attacks on coalition forces was hiding in one of the caves that dotted the mountainside. Chen shifted his position slightly, feeling the familiar weight of his gear pressing against his body. 26 years old, he had already completed 4 deployments to Afghanistan. But something about this mission felt different. The enemy seemed to know they were coming, always staying one step ahead of their operations. "I see it too," murmured Seaman First Class Danny Walsh from his position 30 meters to the right. "Looks like 2 figures moving between those rocks near the cave entrance." The team leader, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, studied the area through her binoculars. At 32, she was one of the few female officers to successfully complete SEAL training, and her team respected her tactical mind and steady leadership under pressure. She had earned her place through years of proving herself in the most dangerous situations imaginable. "Distance?" she asked quietly. 2,000 meters, maybe a bit more," Chen responded, adjusting his scope. "Wind is minimal, but that fog is making it tough to get a clear picture." The 4th member of their team, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tony Martinez, monitored their communication equipment while keeping watch on their 6. Every few minutes, he would report their status back to base camp, maintaining the lifeline that could mean the difference between completing their mission and never making it home. As the morning progressed, the fog began to shift and move in strange patterns. What had started as a typical reconnaissance mission was beginning to feel like something else entirely. The enemy fighters they had been tracking seemed to have vanished, despite having no obvious escape routes from their position. "Boss, you seeing this?" Rodriguez's voice carried a note of confusion. "The fog is moving against the wind direction. That's not normal." Mitchell lowered her binoculars and studied the weather patterns herself. In all her years of military service, she had learned to trust her instincts when something didn't feel right. The mist was indeed behaving strangely, almost as if it were being controlled or manipulated by an unseen force. Chen kept his rifle trained on the area where they had last seen movement. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, ready to engage if their targets reappeared. But as the minutes ticked by, he began to notice something else that made his skin crawl with unease. "I'm getting a weird feeling about this whole situation," Walsh muttered over the comm. "It's too quiet down there. Even for a Taliban hideout, there should be some kind of activity." Martinez checked his equipment one more time, ensuring their communication link remained strong. "Base camp, this is Wolfpack Alpha. We're maintaining overwatch position. No enemy contact at this time, but we're observing unusual weather patterns that may affect visibility." The response came back immediately. "Copy Wolfpack Alpha. Continue mission as planned. Be advised, satellite imagery shows increased activity in your sector over the past hour." Mitchell processed this information while continuing to observe the target area. If satellite imagery was picking up activity that they couldn't see from their position, it meant either the enemy was very good at concealment or something else entirely was happening in that valley. "Chen, I want you to take a shot at that rock formation where we saw the movement," she ordered. "Not at any personnel, just the rocks. I want to see if we can flush out whatever's hiding down there." Chen adjusted his aim and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder, and the team watched as rock fragments exploded from the impact point. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, from multiple positions around the valley, muzzle flashes began appearing as enemy fighters returned fire. Contact! Multiple shooters! Rodriguez shouted as bullets began striking the rocks around their position. The team immediately shifted into combat formation, each member taking cover while maintaining fields of fire toward the enemy positions. But something strange was happening with the fog. Instead of dispersing under the heat of the gunfire, it seemed to be growing thicker, moving with purpose toward their position. Within minutes, visibility dropped to less than 50 meters, forcing the SEALs to rely on their training and instincts rather than their optics. "This isn't natural," Martinez said, his voice tight with concern. "I've never seen fog behave like this before." The enemy fire was becoming more accurate despite the reduced visibility, which suggested they either had night vision equipment or some other technological advantage. Mitchell made the decision to reposition the team to a more defensible location while they figured out what they were really dealing with. "Moving to alternate position Bravo," she announced. "Chen, you and Walsh take point. Rodriguez, rear security. Martinez, stay on comms and let base know we're taking effective fire from unknown number of hostiles." As they moved through the fog, Chen noticed that the mist seemed to part slightly ahead of them, as if something was clearing a path. His rational mind told him it was probably just air currents created by their movement, but his combat instincts were screaming that something was very wrong about their entire situation. The team reached their secondary position just as the fog began to lift slightly. What they saw in the valley below made them question everything they thought they knew about their mission. The cave system was much larger than their intelligence had indicated, and there were signs of recent excavation and construction that suggested a major operation rather than a simple hideout. "Base camp. Wolfpack Alpha," Martinez spoke into his radio. "We need immediate extraction. The situation down here is not what we were briefed for. Requesting air support and additional ground units." The response was filled with static, but they could make out enough to understand that extraction was not immediately available. They were on their own until the weather cleared enough for helicopters to safely navigate the mountain terrain. As if responding to some unseen signal, the fog suddenly began moving again, this time revealing something that made all 4 SEALs freeze in place. A figure was emerging from the mist, moving with the fluid grace of a trained sniper. The person was dressed in military gear, but it wasn't Taliban or any other enemy force they had encountered before. The figure stopped at exactly 2,000 meters from their position, raised a rifle, and seemed to look directly at them despite the distance and remaining patches of fog. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Hunter and hunted stared at each other across the valley, each trying to determine the other's intentions. Chen had his rifle trained on the figure, but something made him hesitate to take the shot. There was something familiar about the way the person moved, something that reminded him of his own training and the countless hours spent perfecting the art of long-range engagement. "Can anyone make out any identifying features?" Mitchell asked, her own weapon ready but not yet aimed at the mysterious sniper. Walsh squinted through his scope. "Negative on identification, but whoever that is, they know what they're doing. That's a perfect sniper position, and they got there without making a sound." The standoff continued as both sides assessed the situation. The fog swirled around the lone figure like a living thing, sometimes obscuring them completely, other times revealing them with crystal clarity. It was as if the weather itself was controlled by this mysterious sniper. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the figure melted back into the fog, leaving the SEALs wondering if they had imagined the entire encounter. But the professional setup of the position and the obvious skill displayed left no doubt that they were dealing with someone very dangerous and very real. The hours that followed the mysterious sniper's disappearance were filled with intense silence that made every member of the SEAL team question what they had witnessed. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell found herself checking and rechecking their equipment, trying to find some rational explanation for the fog's unnatural behavior and the figure that had appeared and vanished like a ghost. "Movement in Sector 4, Chen reported. his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Through his scope, he could see what appeared to be a small group of fighters moving between the rock formations. But these weren't the same people they had been tracking earlier. These fighters moved with military precision, their equipment and tactics suggesting professional training rather than guerrilla warfare. Rodriguez shifted his position to get a better angle on the new contacts. I count 6 individuals, maybe 7. They're carrying advanced optics and what looks like communication equipment. This isn't your typical Taliban cell. The fog had settled into a thin layer that hugged the ground, providing the enemy with concealment while still allowing the SEALs to maintain visual contact with their general area. It was as if the weather was being used as a tactical tool by someone who understood its properties better than anyone should. Martinez continued his attempts to establish reliable communication with their base camp, but the radio static was getting worse instead of better. Something is jamming our communications, he reported. I'm getting fragments of messages, but nothing clear enough to call for extraction or support. Mitchell made the decision to move closer to the enemy position. Staying at their current location was giving them good overwatch, but they needed better intelligence about what they were really facing. We're going to conduct a close reconnaissance. Chen, you stay here as our overwatch. The rest of us will move to within 500 meters of their position. Roger that, boss, Chen acknowledged. I'll keep eyes on that area where the sniper appeared. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of whoever that was. As the 3-person element began their movement down the mountainside, they used every bit of cover available while maintaining communication with Chen through hand signals and short-range radio bursts. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks that could easily give away their position if they weren't careful. Walsh took point, his experience in mountain warfare making him the natural choice for navigating the dangerous approach. Behind him, Mitchell coordinated their movement while Martinez brought up the rear, constantly monitoring for any signs that they had been detected by the enemy forces below. The closer they got to the target area, the more obvious it became that this was no ordinary enemy position. The cave system had been extensively modified with what appeared to be ventilation systems, power cables, and other infrastructure that suggested a permanent installation rather than a temporary hideout. This is way beyond what we were briefed for, Walsh whispered into his microphone. Somebody spent a lot of time and money setting up this operation. Through her binoculars, Mitchell could see that the fighters they were observing had equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything the Taliban typically used. Night vision systems, advanced radios, and weapons that looked like they came from a modern military arsenal rather than the black market. Chen, are you seeing any movement in the sniper position? She asked through their communication link. Negative on the sniper position, but I'm picking up something interesting, came Chen's response. There are reflection signatures from multiple locations around the valley. Looks like we've got optics trained on various positions. We're not the only ones doing surveillance out here. This information sent a chill through the reconnaissance team. If there were multiple sniper positions around the valley, they could be walking into a carefully prepared ambush. The professional nature of the enemy's setup was becoming more apparent with every passing minute. Martinez detected something on his electronic warfare equipment that made him grab Mitchell's arm. Boss, I'm picking up radio chatter on military frequencies. This isn't Taliban communication protocol. Someone is coordinating a complex operation down there. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they painted a picture that was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. This wasn't a simple terrorist hideout or even a weapons cache. They had stumbled onto what appeared to be a sophisticated military operation being conducted by unknown forces. We need to get out of here and report this up the chain, Mitchell decided. This is way above our pay grade. But as they began to retreat to Chen's position, the fog suddenly thickened again, dropping visibility to almost zero. Within seconds, they found themselves separated and disoriented, each team member struggling to maintain contact with the others. Sound off! Mitchell ordered through the radio. "Walsh here. I'm about 50 meters below your last position." "Martinez, I can hear you, but I can't see anything." "Chen, report." Silence. "Chen, respond." More silence, followed by the sound of a single rifle shot echoing through the valley. The fog immediately began to clear, revealing a scene that none of them had expected. Chen was still in his overwatch position, but he was no longer alone. The mysterious sniper had appeared behind him, rifle trained not on Chen, but on a position further down the mountain where an enemy fighter had been attempting to flank their reconnaissance team. "Don't move," a voice called out through the fog. It was clearly a woman's voice, speaking in accented English. "Your man is safe, but we have bigger problems than your mission." Mitchell raised her weapon, trying to locate the source of the voice while keeping track of Walsh and Martinez's positions. The situation had become impossibly complex, with unknown friendlies, sophisticated enemy forces, and weather that seemed to defy natural explanation. "Identify yourself," Mitchell commanded, her training taking over despite the surreal circumstances. The fog parted like a curtain, revealing the sniper who had been watching them. She was a woman in her early 30s, wearing military gear that bore no identifying marks or insignia. Her rifle was a precision instrument that spoke of years of training and experience. Most importantly, she was positioned where she could have eliminated any or all of them at will, but had chosen not to. "My name is Elena Vasquez," the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "I'm with a unit that doesn't officially exist, tracking the same people you stumbled into. The difference is I know what we're really dealing with here." Chen carefully turned around to face the woman, his own rifle still ready but not directly threatening. "How do we know you're not with them?" Elena smiled grimly. "Because if I was with them, your entire team would already be dead. These aren't terrorists or insurgents. They're a private military company conducting illegal weapons testing in international territory. They've been using this location for 6 months, and they don't leave witnesses." The implications of this revelation hit the SEAL team immediately. They had walked into the middle of an operation that involved forces with resources and capabilities that far exceeded anything they had prepared for. Worse, if Elena was correct, they were now targets for elimination simply because they had discovered the facility. "What kind of weapons testing?" Mitchell asked, already dreading the answer. "Electronic warfare systems primarily," Elena responded. "That fog isn't natural. It's being generated by equipment they've been developing for military and intelligence applications. They can create localized weather effects that interfere with satellite surveillance, radio communications, and optical systems." Walsh moved carefully to rejoin the group, his weapon ready, but not aimed at Elena. "That explains the communication problems and the weird weather patterns. It also explains how they've stayed hidden from coalition forces for so long," Martinez added, his electronics warfare equipment finally making sense of the readings he had been getting. Elena gestured toward the cave complex below them. "There are 43 personnel at that facility, including 12 former special operations soldiers from various countries. They know you're here, and they're preparing to eliminate you and make it look like a Taliban ambush." The sound of helicopters in the distance caught everyone's attention. Elena's expression grew more serious as she listened to the approaching aircraft. "Those aren't your extraction birds," she said grimly. "Your communications have been compromised since you arrived in this valley. Everything you've reported back to base has been intercepted and modified. As far as your command knows, you're conducting a routine reconnaissance with no enemy contact." Chen felt his blood run cold as the implications became clear. "They're going to kill us and blame it on the Taliban." "Not if we kill them first," Elena said with cold determination. "But we're going to have to work together, and we're going to have to do it fast." The sound of the approaching helicopters grew louder, and Elena's expression became increasingly urgent. She moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had been in similar situations many times before, checking her equipment while scanning the surrounding terrain for the best defensive positions. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach our position," she said, pulling out a tablet that displayed detailed information about the enemy forces below. "Here's what we know about their capabilities and positions." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell studied the intelligence data, impressed despite the circumstances by its thoroughness and accuracy. Elena's information included detailed floor plans of the cave facility, personnel assignments, weapon placements, and most importantly, the locations of the weather modification equipment that had been creating the unnatural fog. "How did you get all this?" Walsh asked, looking over Mitchell's shoulder at the tablet display. "I've been watching them for 3 weeks," Elena replied. "My mission was to gather intelligence and wait for extraction, but when you showed up, everything changed. They can't leave any witnesses to their operation." Chen maintained his overwatch position, tracking the incoming aircraft through his scope. "I count 2 helicopters, both armed. They're setting up for an attack run on our position." Martinez worked frantically with his communication equipment, trying to establish contact with their real base camp. "I'm getting fragments through the jamming, but nothing reliable enough to call for support." Elena made a decision that would change everything. "Give me your radio frequency. I can punch through their jamming system, but only for a few seconds. You'll have one chance to get a message through to your people." Mitchell hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of trusting this mysterious woman against the certainty of death if they didn't work together. "Do it." Elena attached a small device to Martinez's radio equipment and began working with practiced efficiency. "When I give you the signal, transmit everything you can about this location and what you've discovered. Tell them to verify all previous communications from your team as potentially compromised." The helicopters were now close enough to see clearly, and their intentions became obvious as they began circling the SEAL team's position. These weren't coalition aircraft, and they definitely weren't coming to provide assistance. "Now!" Elena shouted, activating her device. Martinez keyed his microphone and spoke rapidly. "Base Camp, Wolfpack Alpha. Our communications have been compromised. We've discovered a major enemy installation at our current coordinates, conducting illegal weapons testing. Request immediate air support and extraction. All previous reports may be false. We have taken contact from superior forces with advanced capabilities." The response came through clearly for the first time in hours. "Wolfpack Alpha. Confirm your last transmission. We show you as conducting routine reconnaissance with no enemy contact." "Confirmed. We are taking effective fire from unknown forces with electronic warfare capabilities. Request immediate assistance." Elena's device sparked and went dead as the jamming resumed, but the message had gotten through. Now they had to survive long enough for help to arrive. "Chen, can you take out the lead helicopter's pilot?" Mitchell asked. Chen studied the aircraft through his scope, calculating distance, wind speed, and the movement patterns of his target. "It's a long shot, but I can try. The range is extreme, but if I time it with their hover pattern—" "Do it!" The rifle shot cracked across the valley like thunder. Through his scope, Chen watched as the helicopter's cockpit glass spiderwebbed and the aircraft began an uncontrolled descent toward the valley floor. The second helicopter immediately began evasive maneuvers while searching for the source of the shot. "Outstanding shot!" Elena called out with genuine admiration. "Now we need to deal with the ground forces before they coordinate a proper assault." She pulled out a device that looked like a compact mortar round and began adjusting settings on its electronic components. "This will take out their weather modification equipment and level the playing field." Walsh watched as Elena prepared her weapon with professional interest. "What kind of unit did you say you were with?" "The kind that handles problems other people can't solve," she replied with a grim smile. "Stand by for a big noise." The small device launched with a soft thump and arced through the air toward the cave complex. When it detonated, the explosion was far larger than its size suggested, sending shockwaves through the entire valley and collapsing several sections of the enemy facility. Immediately, the unnatural fog began to dissipate, revealing the true scope of the installation they had stumbled upon. The cave system was enormous, with multiple levels of construction and equipment that represented millions of dollars in investment. "Holy hell," Rodriguez muttered as he got his first clear view of what they were dealing with. "This is way bigger than anything we expected." The destruction of the weather modification equipment had also restored their electronic systems to full functionality. Martinez was able to establish clear communication with their base camp and began providing detailed intelligence about the situation. "Air support is inbound," he reported. "ETA 20 minutes. Elena was already moving toward the damaged enemy facility. "We can't wait 20 minutes. They're preparing to evacuate with their research data and equipment. If we let them escape, they'll set up somewhere else and continue their operations." Mitchell made another command decision that went against standard operating procedures, but felt absolutely right, given the circumstances. "We're going in. Elena, you're our guide. Everyone else, standard assault formation." The team moved down the mountainside with Elena leading the way, her knowledge of the facility layout proving invaluable as they navigated around the remaining enemy defenses. The explosion had created enough chaos to mask their approach, but they knew the advantage wouldn't last long. "There," Elena pointed to a camouflaged entrance that would have been invisible without her guidance. "That's their main data center. Everything they've learned about weather manipulation technology is stored in there." Chen remained in overwatch position, providing covering fire as the assault team approached the facility. His precise shots kept the enemy defenders pinned down, while Mitchell, Walsh, Martinez, and Elena made their way to the entrance. The fight that followed was intense but brief. The enemy forces, despite their advanced equipment and training, weren't prepared for a coordinated assault by experienced special operations personnel. Elena's knowledge of the facility layout allowed them to neutralize key positions quickly and efficiently. Inside the data center, Elena worked with amazing speed to download critical intelligence while the others provided security. "This is everything," she said, holding up several storage devices. "Weapon specifications, test results, financial records, personnel files, enough to shut down this entire operation and identify everyone involved." The sound of approaching aircraft filled the air again, but this time it was the distinctive roar of coalition helicopters coming to provide support. Through the facility's damaged communications system, they could hear the enemy forces calling for immediate evacuation. "Time to go," Mitchell ordered. "Elena, you're coming with us." Elena hesitated for a moment. "My extraction orders were to remain in place for pickup by my own people." "Your people aren't here, and ours are," Walsh pointed out practically. "Besides, we're not leaving you behind after everything you've done for us." As they emerged from the facility, the valley was filled with the sound of helicopter rotors and the sight of coalition aircraft establishing control of the airspace. The surviving enemy forces were surrendering or attempting to flee on foot, but the mountainous terrain offered little hope of escape. Chen rejoined the team as their extraction helicopter touched down, and for the first time in hours, everyone felt like they might actually make it out alive. Elena climbed aboard with them, still clutching the intelligence data that would ultimately expose the illegal weapons development program. During the flight back to base, Elena finally explained more about her background and mission. She was part of an international task force that investigated illegal weapons development and proliferation, working outside normal military and intelligence channels to address threats that traditional organizations couldn't handle. "What happens now?" Martinez asked as they flew through the clear mountain air. "Now the real work begins," Elena replied. "This facility was just one part of a larger network. The intelligence we gathered today will help us identify and shut down similar operations around the world. Mitchell looked out at the mountains below, thinking about how a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into something that would likely change all their lives. "Will we see you again?" Elena smiled for the first time since they had met her. "Probably not. My work takes me to places where people like you hopefully never have to go. But if you ever encounter something that doesn't make sense, something that seems too advanced or too well organized to be what it appears, remember today, the world is full of shadows, and sometimes those shadows need people willing to step into them." As their helicopter flew toward safety, Chen reflected on the day's events. He had started the morning as a sniper hunting Taliban fighters and ended it as part of an international operation to stop illegal weapons development. The woman who had emerged from the fog with a sniper rifle had changed everything, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones hiding in plain sight. The mission report would be classified at the highest levels, but the 4 SEALs knew they had been part of something significant. They had helped expose a threat that could have changed the nature of warfare itself, and they had survived an encounter that should have killed them all. Elena's final words to them before disappearing into the intelligence bureaucracy were simple but memorable. Remember that the fog isn't always natural, and the enemy isn't always who you expect them to be. Back at the destroyed facility, investigation teams would find evidence of weather modification technology that was years ahead of anything publicly known. The financial records would lead to arrests of arms dealers and corrupt officials in multiple countries. Most importantly, the personnel files would help identify other facilities and operations that needed to be shut down. The woman who had emerged from the fog had indeed changed everything, proving that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. For the SEAL team, it was a reminder that in their dangerous profession, allies could appear from anywhere, and the most important battles were often fought by people whose names would never be known to history.